Welcome to the More Than OK podcast, a wellbeing and family podcast about tips, strategies and stories on how to be more than okay. I'm Belinda Bray. I am a wife, a mum and a teacher, and I love learning about wellbeing, and I love taking what I've learnt into my everyday life, into my family and into my classroom. And I'm excited to bring you along the journey so you can be more than okay.
Welcome back to another episode of More Than Okay. Today we have a special guest. He's special to me. This is Micheal Bray. Micheal Bray is our fearless leader, our principal here at Highlands Christian College. He's also my husband. So he's been brought in to have a chat with us today. How are you today?
I'm very well and very excited to be here. Thank you.
We are going to be talking today about grit. And when I was talking about this with a group of teachers down in the college, I just kept thinking of you and grit. So I thought I would just explain what grit is, because it's not just stuff that gets stuck in your shoe. It is actually a psychological term. There's a psychologist called Angela Duckworth, and she's a specialist in grit. She's written a book called Grit, and she says that grit is passion and sustained persistence. I'm going to read this. I apologise. I want to get it right. Passion and sustained persistence applied towards long-term achievement with no particular concern for rewards or recognition along the way. And that made me think of you.
Oh.
So what some of you probably don't know about Micheal is that he is a trail runner. And not just that, he does the ultra distances. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
I just love running. That's what I love to do. And I think as I've gotten older and perhaps a little bit slower, I flipped in my mind from going faster to going further. And that's when I discovered ultra running, and distances of over 100 kilometres, 100 miles excite me because of the challenge, because of the grit required. So that's what I do in my spare time.
Now, when we first started going out, you would ride your bike to visit me, which I thought was odd because I lived quite a bit out of town. And then you kind of got into triathlon when you were at uni. And then you got into road cycling and did quite well at road cycling. Then we moved to London, and we didn't feel it was the place to ride a bike in London. So you literally, on the day we arrived in London, went for a run, right?
That is correct.
And so it's been for a very long time. So you began running, but it wasn't just running, was it? It then became the marathon. And then, so you've always had a thing, something that you are working towards.
I guess I've always had a fascination with endurance, and it's probably because I can't sprint. I'm the slowest sprinter on the planet, and unfortunately most of my children have inherited those genes. And so I've always had this fascination with going further. So even when I was cycling, it wasn't the fast races, it was the long races that fascinated me. And so when I started running, basically just to keep fit because I didn't have a bike, it was like, well, I'm going to run, I might as well run a marathon. And it didn't take me long to figure out that the holy grail of marathon running was breaking 3 hours. If you could say you were a sub 3 hour marathoner, there was something special about that. And so I set myself about going, right, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to run a marathon in under 3 hours.
Yes. I've spent a lot of time on the sidelines, right?
Yes.
So where has that come from? Like, where has this drive to do the hard things come from?
Do you know what? It's actually really something that I struggle to answer. I find it difficult to answer that. I guess there's been a degree of it's always been in there, but I think part of it is things haven't necessarily come easy for me. And I don't say that in a woe is me type way, but I'm not the most athletically gifted person in the world. I've just always loved sport. I've loved endurance. And so I guess that process of setting a goal, going about it, and people will say, why would you run 100 miles? Unless you've done that, you can't understand or explain the feeling of accomplishment that comes with that, which is incredible. But I also think it's not that in itself, it's the process. When you're running races of that distances, you can't do them every weekend. Maybe doing 1 or 2 or 3 at most a year. So you've got to enjoy the other 200 runs that go in between them. And I love the process of planning, of strategizing, of achieving. You know how much time I spend doing those sorts of things. So it's that whole process, I think, of setting a goal and going after it.
Great. So Angela Duckworth talks about grit being more important than IQ. As a teacher, as an educator, what do you think about that?
Oh, look, I think it's absolutely valid. I've been in this game for over 20 years now, and I've been around long enough that I have watched the journey of some of people I taught 20 years ago who at school struggled academically, struggled socially. But you look back 15 years later now and you see where they've come from to where they are, what they're achieving, and it's grit that's got them there. I've seen other students that have got the OP1s, that have schools come to them naturally, and they haven't developed the resilience, the drive, the almost fighter spirit that goes into grit, I think. And so when they've hit life's challenges, be they relationally, financially, professionally, they've fallen over a lot more quickly than some of those students that things haven't come to easily.
That's really interesting. And we, with our children, we've seen this. We've got 3 very different children. One of them's very academic, and school, she's built for school. She understands it. She gets that you do the work, you put in the hours, you practice, you produce work, you get good marks. We have another daughter who is super creative and really slogs it out. She really has to work hard and push herself, especially in maths. Everything else she seems to be okay at. And we see her drawing on that grit and that resilience to be okay with herself, knowing that she's not as mathsy. And then we have our other child. He does really well academically, but socially he needs to really pull that grit and dig deep to actually do the social stuff. So we all have our thing. We all have our thing that we have to dig in and find that purpose and passion and, drive to succeed in those areas.
Absolutely.
The other reason I wanted to get you onto the podcast was to talk about a race you've just done. And the outcome was going to be different to what we thought, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So Mike recently signed up to do the Brisbane Valley Rail Trail 100-mile race, 160 kilometres. Yes.
Yes, I did. Yep.
Yep. And it was a great day. It's beautiful out there if you've not been for a drive through the country. I was out there doing crewing, starting very early in the morning, and just watching the progression of the day. So the first aid station, peppy, happy, chirpy. Second aid station, similar, chirpy, just getting it done. Third aid station, there was my legs are sore, this doesn't feel okay. To then another aid station where he was like, it's getting really hard. And I'm thinking, well, yes, because you're running a very long way. And then at 144 kilometres, we had to make the decision to DNF or to do not finish the race. And it was hard, right?
Very hard. Yep. I hate not finishing something.
And so, this conversation was going to be different about how you finished your race, and we were so excited. And I just wanted to, we have spoken about whether we would talk about this because it's a process of working out what happened and what to do next.
And it's still a bit raw, to be honest. That was only 10 days ago.
Yeah. And so I just wanted to talk to you about how you got from, it was pretty bleak when we had to drive home in the middle of the night and knowing that you hadn't finished, to a place a few days later where you had already started to rebuild. I would love to know what happened in those couple of days between the DNF and the getting ready for the next race, because there will be more races.
I've signed up already. 2 things. I think one, time. It actually, with over time, disappointment fades, and I'm still disappointed now, 10 days later. but time certainly does help. But I think most importantly, having conversations with key people who sit outside of your sphere. And you're certainly one of those, but a good conversation with my coach and a good conversation with a couple of friends as well, where we unpacked what went wrong. But also sometimes I think in my mind, I normalise excellence. And, I've run a 100-mile race before, so not finishing this was never on my radar. And so I actually needed some people from outside to go, you actually ran 144 kilometres and you spent most of the day in second place. Let's take the positives out of that. And I've also got a very short memory. I had 7 months off running last year with an injury, and I've only been back at it 5 months. And so maybe it was a little bit crazy to pick such a lofty goal straight up. But I think what's really helped me was I had a moment where I asked myself the question, why do I do this? When you're 130k into a race and in all sorts of pain in the middle of the night and it's freezing, you certainly ask yourself why. But retrospectively, I asked myself why, and the answer was to find my limits. That's what I actually love about the endurance stuff, is I think we live in a world that's so easy, so comfortable. We rarely get challenged physically anymore. We're not hunting bears, we're not fighting off predators. And so I do these events to find where my limits are. And last Saturday, I found my limit. And I was disappointed with where that limit was. But I had this moment where I realised that was my limit for that day, in those circumstances, at the end of what's been a really tough year in a bunch of different ways. And that's okay. When I realised that's not my forever limit and that there's still room for improvement and I will come back and I'll rebuild and I'll train more, that's what got the fire back, knowing that there's still a long way to go.
That's great. It's really good, and it was really inspiring to watch because at the end of the day, I was the one that actually said, "You're not finishing this," and that's part of being on crew, right? Is that you've put your trust in me to make those decisions when you can't, and so God was all through this though. At that last station where we had to DNF, there was a physio. There was an ambulance officer who were just helping out at that aid station. And so the physio was in there, tried to loosen, what was it, your hip?
Everything.
And, the other guy was trying to get you warm and we were trying to get you back out there. But just having that, I didn't have to solely make that decision, that the physio, I don't even know his name, but he was there and he was helping us and helping me to help you make the right decision so that you could run again.
Yeah.
Because, you could have gone on to finish it, but you would have been, anyway, we can't unpack all of it, but just knowing that God was in there even when it didn't go your way, for me was really encouraging too.
And I think you've touched on an important point there, and that is we can talk about grit the way that we are, and we're talking about that as an individual characteristic, and it has to be internal, and it is something that comes from inside. But I never think you have grit without a team. You've got to have the people around you, matching your weaknesses, cheering you on, bouncing ideas off. Life was meant to be lived in community, and going out on a limb here, but I think whenever you talk to someone who displays grit, there'll always be people in the background who are part of that journey.
That's great. Now, we are a parenting podcast.
Indeed.
So how can we turn what you've just said about grit and your experience with that race? Is there some things we can help parents with, or is there some takeaway things we can give families on how we can teach grit?
I think one of the most important things is to model resilience. And I know for me with my children, I want them to see me doing hard stuff. I'm not saying that's why I run. I run because I love it. It's very selfish. But I think one of the spin-offs of that is my children have seen that process of set a goal, out of bed at 4 a.m. every morning to do the training, to achieve the outcome. And I hope that that's something that they take away. But I think also too, when life's challenges come, melting down in front of our kids or not coping with those things is detrimental to them. And I see a lot of children, even in the educational setting, where they're lacking resilience, but I think it's been modelled at home because their parents aren't coping. So I think being strong parents and actually modelling resilience, but also giving our children strategies as well, being that person, being part of their team where we can actually say, all right, let's look at what's going on here. Is it as bad as what you think? How can we move forward through this situation to get the outcome that you're after?
You've learnt grit through this whole running experience, but our family's been through quite a bit in the last couple of years with various things that have gone on. So this whole idea of modelling, that's the hardest part of parenting, I think, is that I have to be on my best behaviour and sometimes I'm not. And so with grit comes that vulnerability to actually sign up for things that are hard, that may not always come off. And so then when things aren't going our way, we actually still have to model our response. And I think that's been really valuable for our children. I think they've actually seen us at our best and our worst. And I'm hoping that they can learn and grow from that.
Yeah, and I guess a phrase I heard about 12 months ago, which I simultaneously love and hate, is that it's the job of a leader to absorb chaos and radiate hope. And so as a principal, particularly through COVID, that's been something I've had to do, is go, the world could be falling apart, but I'm going to stand in front of my people and say, it's going to be okay. I'll take the body blows so that we can move forward and do great things here. But I think that's important as a parent as well. And when we talk about modelling resilience to our children, we're not just saying everything's great and putting on a great face. I think something that I've learned as a parent is it's actually okay to say, do you know what? Life's actually really tough at the moment. And sometimes my children will ask me at the end of the day, so how was your day, Dad? And I'll be about to say, yeah, it was great. And I'll go, do you know what? Today was actually really hard. I can't tell you why, but it's been a tough one. But we're going to work through it and we're going to make tomorrow better. And so I think our kids need to see that as well. There needs to be that degree of vulnerability as a parent without collapsing and melting down in front of them. It's a tricky balance maybe. I don't know.
Great. So some takeaways that we can pull from this conversation when it comes to grit is, one, modelling the behaviour for our children. 2 is to have a community around you, is to have someone to talk to, someone to unpack things with. I think that's really important. And I think the third one is to encourage everybody in their goals and to help them pursue hard things and to have set challenges and set goals and to work through that and show that grit and resilience to actually achieve what you want to do. So, Mr. Bray.
Yes, Mrs. Bray.
What's next?
What's next?
What's your next run?
I have signed up for the Ultra Trail Kosciuszko, 100-kilometre race.
Just 100?
Just 100 kilometres this time at altitude. So that'll be fun. Starts in Thredbo, finishes at Lake Crackenback with 100 kilometres of alpine beauty in between. So can't wait for that. And I know there's a few other people in our Highlands community who have signed up for that as well. So that's very exciting too.
That's great. Thank you for coming on the podcast. It's always fun to know that I can just grab you and talk about all sorts of things. Thank you for your time.
Thanks for having me.